Hello everyone and welcome to Prof Talks. Today we'll be discussing the 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic records and electronic signatures. We'll also review the guidance for industry on the Part 11 for electronic records and electronic signatures. So if we see the computerized system for GxP use, we know that US FDA 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic records and electronic signatures was published in August 1997. It should be remembered that this is a regulation and it is a compulsion to follow the requirements of this part. The second, US FDA guidance for industry on the Part 11 electronic records and electronic signatures for scope and application, which US FDA has issued in the year August 2003. This is a guidance for industry and it has been published to have a more clarification onto the regulation of Part 11. There's one more, the EU guideline of Utralex Volume 4, and there is Annex 11 for the computerized system, which was issued in June 2011. We'll review this Utralex Volume 4 into some other presentation. Today we'll be focusing on the US FDA 21 CFR Part 11 and the guidance for industry for the same. Before moving ahead, please ensure that you have subscribed to the channel Prof Talks and have pressed the bell icon so that you can receive the notification of upcoming presentations. So let us begin with the review of the regulation, that is 21 CFR Part 11. So if you can see, it has been divided into three subparts. Subpart A, which gives the general provision, that is firstly the scope, that is 11.1, 11.2 is implementation, and 11.3 is definitions. In the subpart B, it defines electronic records, where 11.10 is the controls for closed system, 11.30 is the control for open system, 11.50 is the signature manifestation, and 11.70 is signature and record linkage. The last subpart, that is subpart C, is for electronic signatures, where 11.100 gives the general requirements for electronic signatures, 11.200 gives the electronic signature components and controls, and 11.300 gives the controls for identification codes and passwords. So we'll look into each of the subpart and the requirements in detail. First, moving with the scope, that is 11.1. Agency considers electronic records, electronic signatures, and handwritten signatures to the electronic records to be trustworthy, reliable, and equivalent to the handwritten signatures. These electronic records apply to the records in the electronic form that are created, modified, and maintained under any requirements by any computerized system. It also applies to the electronic records submitted to the agency, even if such records are not specifically identified in any industry regulations. And these records does not apply to the paper records that are or have been transmitted by electronic means. If we are transmitting any paper records to the agency by any electronic means, such records do not fall under the category of Part 11. Where e-signatures and associated e-records meet the requirements of this part, agency will consider electronic signatures equivalent to the handwritten signatures. And electronic records that meet the requirement of this part may be used instead of paper records unless paper records are specifically required. Computer systems, including hardware and software, controls and documentation should be readily available for inspection by the agency. There are certain exceptions that these requirements of Part 11 do not apply generally to a number of requirements of the 21 CFR. These are the number of parts which are mainly related to the food industry, and this is for human food and animal food. We'll move ahead with the implementation, that is 11.2. So if you can see, for records required to be maintained but are not submitted to the agency, electronic records and electronic signatures in place of paper records or handwritten signatures may be used provided that requirements mentioned in the Part 11 are met. For electronic records that are submitted to the US FDA, persons may use electronic signatures or records in place of paper records or signatures when the requirements of this part are met and the documents are described have been submitted identified in the public docket 92S-0251. So please note that this is the public docket number where the agency has specified the details of documents that can be submitted in the electronic form. Moving ahead with the definitions. First, there's a definition of handwritten signature. We all know what is a handwritten signature. It is the scripted name or a legal mark of an individual which is generally put onto a paper or onto any device where it can be applied. Electronic signature. It is a computer data compilation of any symbol or series of symbols executed or authorized by an individual, which is a legally binding and equivalent to the individual's handwritten signature. Third, that is a digital signature. Digital signature is an electronic signature which is based on the cryptographic methods of original authentication, computed by using a set of rules and parameters such that the identity of signer and integrity of data is verified. Next is biometrics. The method of verifying the individual's identity based on some physical features or repeatable actions that are unique to that particular individual and are measurable. The definitions continued. It includes the electronic record. It is any combination of text, graph or data that has been created, modified, maintained, retrieved or distributed using a computerized system. A closed system is an environment in which the system access is controlled by the persons who are responsible for content of electronic records that are onto that system. And an open system is an environment in which the system access is not controlled by the person who are responsible for content created on that system. Moving to the subpart B, that is the electronic records, we look into 11.10, that is control for closed system. We have seen that the closed system is a system where the system is controlled by the people who are responsible for the record. So procedures and controls be designed to ensure authenticity, integrity and confidentiality of the records and to ensure that signer cannot negate the signed document as not genuine. So such procedures and controls can include validation to ensure accuracy, reliability, consistent intended performance and ability to discern invalid or altered records. The ability to generate accurate and complete copies of records in both human readable and electronic format. Protection of records to enable their accurate and ready retrieval throughout the record retention period. Limiting the system access to authorized individuals, use of a secure computer-generated time-stamped audit trails to independently record date and time of operator entries. Recognized changes shall not obscure the previously recorded information and audit trail documentation should be reviewed for the same period of time as that of the electronic record. Use of the operational system checks to enforce permitted sequencing of steps and events. Use of authority checks to ensure only authorized individuals can use the system, electronically sign a record, access input or output device after a record or permanent in the operation at hand. Use of a device checks to determine validity of the source of data input or operational instructions. Determination that the person who develop, maintain or use electronic record or system signatures have the education, training and experience to perform their assigned tasks. The establishment of and adherence to return policies that hold individuals accountable and responsible for the actions related to the electronic records and signatures. Appropriate control over system documentation, including adequate controls over distribution of access to and use of documentation for system operation and maintenance, revision and change control procedure to maintain an audit trail that documents time sequence development modification of system documentation. If we look into the controls of the open system, all the controls that are applicable for the closed systems are applicable to the open system as well, and additional measures such as document encryption and use of digital signature to ensure record authenticity and integrity may be implemented. Looking into the 11.50, that is signature manifestation, the signed electronic records shall contain the following information: the printed name of the signer, the date and time when the signature was executed, the meaning of the signature, that is reviewed by, approved by, etc. The items identified in the point A above shall be subjected to some control as for the electronic records and be included as a part of any human readable form of the electronic record. Looking into the signature and record linking, electronic signatures and handwritten signatures executed to the electronic records shall be linked to the respective electronic records to ensure that the signatures cannot be copied or otherwise transferred falsely an electronic record to ordinary means. Moving to the last subpart for the 21 CFR Part 11 regulation, that is for electronic signatures. If we look into the general regulations for the electronic signatures, that is Part 11.100, each electronic signature shall be unique to an individual and shall not be reused by or reassigned to anyone else. Organization shall verify the identity of an individual before establishing or sanctioning an individual's electronic signature. Person using electronic signature shall certify to the agency that electronic signature in their system are intended to be legally binding and equivalent to the handwritten signatures. It should be done prior to or at the time of such use. So we say that certification be submitted in paper form and signed with the traditional handwritten signature to the office address mentioned here. And the person using electronic signatures shall provide additional certification or testimony that a specific electronic signature is legally binding equivalent of signer's handwritten signature. Moving to 11.200, electronic signature components and controls. Electronic signatures that are not based on biometrics shall employ at least two distinct identification components like an identification code and a password. When an individual executes a series of functions in a single continuous period, first signing shall be executed using all the components of electronic signature, that is the identification code and password, and the subsequent signatures shall be executed using at least one electronic component. It is usually a password. And when an individual executes one or more signing but not into a single continuous run, then each signature should use all the electronic signature components, that is both the identification code and password. The electronic signatures be used only by their genuine owners. It should be ensured that attempted use of any individual's electronic signature by other person requires collaboration of two or more individuals. An electronic signature based on biometrics be designed to ensure that they cannot be used by anyone other than the genuine owners. The last part, that is 11.300, controls for identification codes and passwords. Person who use electronic signatures based on identification codes and passwords shall employ controls that includes maintaining uniqueness of each combined identification code and password. It should be in such a way that no two individuals have the same combination of identification code and password. Ensuring that identification code and password issuances are periodically checked, recalled and revised. Following loss management procedures to electronically deauthorize the lost, stolen or missing token cards and other devices that bear or generate identification code or password, and to issue temporary or permanent replacements. Use of transaction safeguards to prevent unauthorized use of the passwords or the identification codes, and urgent manner and attempt at their unauthorized use to the security unit and organizational management. Initial and periodic testing of devices such as tokens or cards that bear or generate identification code or password information to ensure that they function properly and have not been altered in an unauthorized manner. This brings to the end of the 21 CFR regulation. Now we move to the guidance for industry part 11, records and signatures, the scope and application. Please note that this guidance for industry has been issued in addition to the 21 CFR Part 11 requirements to define specifically the scope and application of the 21 CFR Part 11. So we'll have a look at this guidance, which is in collaboration with the 21 CFR Part 11, what we have seen just now. So this guidance includes the introduction, the background, discussion, that is an overall approach to the Part 11 requirements, details of approach, that is scope of Part 11, where there is a narrow interpretation of the scope and definition of the Part 11 records, approach to specific Part 11 requirements, which includes the validation, audit trail, legacy system, copies of records, and record retention. So these 5 aspects, the agency have given some discretion into this guidance based on the narrow interpretation of the scope and the definition of Part 11 records. We'll see details of each. So first we look into the introduction that has been given. It has been stated in this guidance that FDA is re-examining the Part 11 requirements with respect to the current CGMP. So this guidance, that is this requirement for Part 11, was issued in August 1997, and the agency is re-examining it with reference to the current CGMP. So while re-examination of Part 11 is underway, FDA has intended to exercise some discretion of certain Part 11 requirements. So we have seen 5 aspects into the introduction part, and specifically discretion have been given onto these 5 parts. What are the details? We'll see. It should not, however, be noted that Part 11 remains in effect, and this exercise of discretion applies only to the identified aspects in this guidance. And FDA do not intend to take enforcement action to enforce compliance specifically with related to validation of the computerized system, audit trail, record retention, and record copying, as well as they do not intend to enforce the systems that were operational before August 1997. These are specifically referred to as the legacy systems. So the agency have given discretion mainly with reference to validation of the computerized system, audit trail, record retention, record copying, and the legacy systems. If you look into the background, as Part 11 became effective, there was a wide variety of discussion into the industry among the contractors and the agency about the interpretation and implementation of this particular guidelines. So the concerns were raised among various industry stalwarts that the interpretation is very broad, and this would unnecessarily restrict the use of an electronic technology into the pharmaceutical industry. It would significantly increase the cost of compliance, discourage innovation and technological advances, and hence these concerns were specifically related to the requirements for validation, audit trails, record retention, record copying, and the legacy system. So the agency issued this guidance to provide discretion and clarification related to specific these identified concern areas. So this guidance is based mainly on 3 elements. Part 11 will be interpreted narrowly, now clarifying that fewer records will be considered subjected to Part 11. And for records subjected to Part 11, intended to exercise discretion for validation, audit trail, record retention, record copying, and to the legacy system. So first, the Part 11 requirements will be implemented for a limited group of records, and second, to whatever records it has been implemented, there will be certain discretion with related to the 5 mentioned topics. Now moving to Part B, that is details of approach, scope of Part 11. The first point in this is the narrow interpretation of scope. So when we say when a person chooses to use record in an electronic format in place of a paper format, then Part 11 requirements apply to those records. On the other hand, when person uses computer to generate a paper printout of electronic record and rely on paper records to perform regulated activities, then records would not trigger Part 11 requirements. So definition of Part 11 records. Records maintained in an electronic format in place of paper format are the Part 11 records. And records that do not require to be maintained under these rules but are maintained in electronic format are not Part 11 records. The firm should determine whether specific records are Part 11 records, and they should clearly document such decisions. Records maintained in an electronic format in addition to paper format and relied on to perform regulated activities are the Part 11 records. If you see the example, if a firm uses a computer to generate paper printouts of electronic records but rely on electronic record to perform regulated activities, then such records are Part 11 records. Firms should determine in advance whether to rely on an electronic record or a paper record and should clearly document this decision in an SOP. Records submitted to FDA in electronic format, even if not specifically identified in the regulation, are considered to be the Part 11 records. Electronic signatures that are intended to be equivalent to handwritten signatures are considered to be a Part 11 requirement. Moving to the approach specific Part 11 requirements, first, there is some discretion with reference to these 5 requirements that we have seen. We'll first look into validation. Decision to validate a computerized system and extent of validation must take into account the impact of the systems have on the ability to meet the requirements. It should also consider the impact on the accuracy, reliability, integrity, and availability of the records and signatures. Even if there is no specific requirement to validate a system, in some cases it may still be important to validate that particular computerized system. Base the approach on a justified and documented risk assessment and determination of potential of the system to affect product quality and record integrity. Example, the validation would be important is not important for a word processor used only to generate the SOPs. Second, the audit trail. Even if there is no requirement to document date, time, or sequence of event, it may be important to have audit trails or other physical or procedural security measures to ensure trustworthiness and reliability of the records. Base the decision on whether to apply audit trails or other measures on a documented risk assessment and determination of potential impact on product quality, record integrity. Apply appropriate control based on such assessments. Audit trails can be particularly important when users create, modify, or delete regulated records during operation. We move to the legacy system. Discretion of the system which are operational prior to August 1997, that is when Part 11 became effective. Agency does not intend to take enforcement action with any Part 11 requirements if following criteria are met for the legacy systems. The systems were operational before the effective date of Part 11, that is August 1997. The system met all the applicable rule requirements before the effective date of Part 11. Whatever the rules were effective before Part 11, if the legacy system is complying to that rule, then it should not apply the Part 11 requirements. The system currently meets all the applicable rule requirements. Documented evidence and justification that system is fit for its intended use, including having an acceptable level of record security and integrity. If a system has been changed since August 1997 and if changes would prevent system from meeting the rule requirements, Part 11 controls should be applied to Part 11 records and signatures pursuant to the enforcement policy expressed in this guidance. Moving to the copies of the record, firm should provide an investigator with reasonable and useful access to records during any inspection. All records held by the firms are subjected to inspection. Agency recommend to supply copies of electronic records by producing copies of record held in common portable format when records are maintained in these formats, using established automated conversions or export methods to make copies in a more common formats like PDF, XML or SGML. Copying process produces copies that preserve content and meaning of the record. If firm has the ability to search, sort or trend the Part 11 records, the agency should provide the same capability. Firm should allow inspection, review and copying of the records in a human readable form using the firm's hardware and following established procedure to the agency and techniques for assessing the records. And finally, the record retention. Agency suggests that decision on how to maintain records be based on rule requirements and decision is based on justified and documented risk assessment. FDA does not object if firm decide to archive record in electronic format to non-electronic media like microfilm or paper or any standard electronic file format like PDF XML. Copies of required records should preserve their content and meaning. As long as predicate rule requirements are fully satisfied and content and meaning of records are preserved and archived, firm can delete the electronic version of these records. In addition, paper and electronic record and signature components can coexist, that is in a hybrid situation, as long as predicate rule requirements are met and content and meaning of those records are preserved. With this, we come to the end of this presentation. Thank you for watching. Thank you.